Thank you. So I'm going to, first of all, my name is Paul Gunter. I'm director of the Reactor Oversight project at Beyond Nuclear. Beyond Nuclear has only been around since 2007, but worked for 16 years with a group called Nuclear Information and Resource Service in Washington. And before that, I was involved with a group called the Clamshell Alliance in New England. We started out in 1975, basically organizing around a construction project for two Westinghouse pressurized water reactors that were proposed for a saltwater estuary on the New Hampshire seacoast. And we set about through a process of public education, nonviolent direct action, taking lessons from Martin Luther King, Mohandas Gandhi, the suffragettes movement, on how important citizen involvement, citizen participation, participatory democracy, this is how change happens. Every major change begins with the public becoming aware, becoming active, and using the principles that we have in democracy to make change. And the nuclear issue is no different. And these, as we know, are often long struggles. And in fact, I often quip half kiddingly that I'll have to reincarnate to address this issue. More particularly, if you understand that the issue of nuclear power, the electricity is only a fleeting byproduct. The legacy is millions of years of nuclear waste for which there will be no benefit to any of the succeeding generations. Only this liability of building barriers within barriers within barriers over decades, over centuries, to contain the hellish byproduct of nuclear power. And that, you know, basically needs to be put into this context that uranium, in fact, is the currency of a coin whose flip sides are nuclear weapons and nuclear power, nuclear waste. So we need to keep in our vision that it's more than just the nuclear power issue, but we're now faced with the spread of this technology means the spread of nuclear weapons as well. So the context that we work in at Beyond Nuclear is to address both the need to abandon nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And that this is a matter of planetary survival. So the message that I want to bring you tonight, in the short time that we have to share together, is that Fukushima has basically changed the landscape of the nuclear issue. And what it raises is really the issue of not only the danger of nuclear power itself, but when the profit motive is lost on this industry is really when our problems begin. We can begin to address the need to shut down nuclear power plants, but that's only the beginning. The deeper problem is that this whole environmental dilemma is captured by a corporate infrastructure, corporate power that really began in Hanford with the production of the nuclear weapons. So you're right here at the birthplace of something fiendish that that will have consequence even beyond its perpetrators. And that it is such a strong presence that it even manages to capture entire governments. And you know, we've seen this most clearly in this opening slide. I mean, here we have the 5 commissioners of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission: William Magwood, Christine Savinky, Allison McFarland, George Apostolakis, and William Ostendorf. And I'm sure they're all people of integrity. But they are part and parcel of a systematic and systemic capture that goes even beyond the boundaries of the United States. It's a global industry now. It's a global process. And it has consequences. And I've known since 1978, actually, was when I first became aware of the issue of a catastrophe waiting to happen. We were, I was involved in the process of organizing around the Seabrook Nuclear Power Construction Project. We were faced with a more imminent threat from an operating nuclear reactor that had just began in 1972. And it was a General Electric Mark I boiling water reactor in Vernon, Vermont, just across the Connecticut River from where I lived in New Hampshire. And we were aware that this was a bad design, fundamentally flawed. And that awareness really grew over several decades. And when I got a call from CNN on March 11th, 2011, they asked me to come in and comment on camera for the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. This accident had occurred in Japan as a result of the earthquake and the tsunami that we were all aware of, but something was now awry at the nuclear power plant at Fukushima Daiichi. There were high radiation readings around the perimeter of the facility, and they asked me to come in, and within a 10-minute conversation, the journalist Jean Meserve, who, by the way, was the sister of Richard Meserve, who was a former commissioner of the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So here I am being interviewed by Richard Meserve's sister on a nuclear accident that was occurring in Japan. And she asked me, just very simply, what is your concern? And I said, well, our concern is that this reactor could literally blow its roof. And in fact, that's what we saw the next day. It was just, you know, a matter of hours when what was occurring while we were on camera was fuel damage at the Fukushima Daiichi facility. And in the process of that fuel damage in the core, there was this liberation of hydrogen gas from the intense heat and electrolysis and the interaction between the zircaloy element that makes up all the fuel in these reactors. And you should understand that zirconium, which is it's a very strong alloy that is a very effective heat transfer element, so that when you heat uranium, enriched uranium through the criticality process, it transfers heat very, very efficiently through very thin walls, but it's very strong. But if you powder zirconium, that's what goes into high explosives. That's the flash powder in flash bulbs. And when uranium interacts with zirconium, and you get this interaction of the zirconium overheating, interacting with water, it separates out the elements of water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you get a very explosive environment that is looking for an ignition source. Well, I should note that Anthony Petranglia, who's also was on camera, said that, well, that chance is very, very remote. And in fact, nuclear power has consistently relied upon this premise, this assumption that the probability of that worst case is so remote that the risk is well worth the taking and the benefit. But in review of the accident, the Japan National Diet, which is the Japan's equivalent to our Congress, their Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission, quite frankly, concluded that Fukushima was a man-made disaster, and that it was primarily the result of a collusion between government, regulator, and Tokyo Electric Power Company. But that collusion is precisely what's going on all around in all these regulatory bodies. That you have a system of where nuclear power is promoted by government subsidy, and that's historically been the case. We've known all along that going back to documents going to 1952, the Atomic Energy Commission put out a white paper where they interviewed and had a request for proposals to groups like Monsanto, Union Carbide, Union Electric, Detroit Edison, Westinghouse, General Electric. And their white paper was to request and promote the idea that government was looking for partnership with corporations for national defense. And that the government announced that there was now this opportunity for corporations to participate in the production of plutonium, and in the process of promoting plutonium production for nuclear weapons, they could co-generate electricity from the waste heat through nuclear power. And this was the premise in 1952. 1954, it's reframed as atoms for peace. And in that same era, we went from 8,000 nuclear weapons to 21,000 nuclear weapons in the United States. And eventually they did build one dual-purpose reactor that was precisely, I think even President John F. Kennedy was at its coronation. But generally speaking, the nuclear power issue took off on its own. But that was here at Hanford, where the dream of this white paper in 1952 actually took root. And government and industry set forth a proposal to co-generate electricity for the purpose of plutonium production. And it is ever so now the threat that we see not only a man-made disaster from a mistake, but the overarching threat to all life on this planet from this partnership. Aside from the mistake, I wanted to point out that another big concern that we've had for nuclear power is this is basically engineering 101 here. But we have what's called the bathtub curve. And essentially what it is whether we're talking about nuclear power plants or electric toasters, you introduce a product along a time and event sequence, accident sequence, failure modes. And we see that when you introduce a product early on, you have a period of a high rate of failure. As they work the bugs out of the contraption, the failure rate falls off. It can be fairly steep, where you reach a useful life period. And then as components wear out, as you find materials are susceptible, corrosion, cracking, embrittlement, when that starts to set in, then we see the event horizon increase, the accident sequence increase, or what's called the wear out life. We're concerned that, in fact, right now we are probably somewhere early on in this phase out here. We've seen events already. 3 Mile Island was only 3 months old when it had its meltdown. Chernobyl was only 2 years old when it had its catastrophic accident. Now we're beginning to see other events here, like the Davis-Besse nuclear power station in Ohio, where we found a high rate of corrosion. Can I have the next slide? This is literally a reactor with a hole in its head. You're looking at the Davis-Besse nuclear power station, and in April of 2000, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission had this picture when the power station was set to go back online for 2 more years during refueling. So this was after the refueling. The NRC inspectors received this picture, and they gave a green light to the Davis-Besse nuclear power station, First Energy Nuclear Corporation, the go-ahead to operate for 2 more years. Anybody looking at this picture can tell that something very, very wrong is going on at this reactor. What you're looking at, in fact, is iron oxide roiling off the top of the reactor pressure vessel. Next slide. And in fact, what was going on was that this here is the top of the reactor pressure vessel. This is 7 3/4 inches of carbon steel with an inner liner of 3/16 of an inch of stainless steel. The stainless steel liner is there to keep the corrosive borated coolant that's in this pressurized environment, 2,000 pounds per square inch, operating at temperatures of 600 degrees Fahrenheit, to keep that borated corrosive coolant from eating its way out. But Davis-Besse had developed a crack in a susceptible material, Inconel 600, that is used as sleeving, a pressure-fitted sleeving, so the control rods can drive in and out of the reactor to control the reaction. And just the wear and tear had caused this cracking, and the borated coolant under this pressure was being forced out through those cracks, hairline cracks. The steam was then, it would flash to steam, and the steam would condense and rain down on the top of the reactor vessel head, which was again 600 degrees Fahrenheit. So the water would immediately flash off, leaving a puddle of boric acid. This boric acid ate through 6 3/4 inches of carbon steel, leaving the 3/16 inch liner now bulging from this 2,000 pounds per square inch pressure, so that it looked like a tire about to burst. And in fact, we were probably as close as 8 weeks, depending on what the corrosion rate is, nobody really knows. But 8 weeks from a major accident in Ohio from a pressure vessel rupture. But again, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they had not only seen that picture, but Davis-Besse is a Babcock and Wilcox pressurized water reactor. It is, there are 7 of these reactors in the United States. Babcock and Wilcox is the model of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant. There were 2 units. One melted down in '79. I should say Unit 2 melted down in '79, and Unit 1 is operational. But the NRC had known that 6 of the 7 Babcock and Wilcox reactors had cracks in the sleeving. The only one that had not been inspected was Davis-Besse. So the staff had, using its regulatory guidance, had formulated a draft order to shut down Davis-Besse early so that it could go through the inspections to look for those cracks. And they gave the order to the senior safety officer for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission with the Nuclear Reactor Regulation Division, who took it to First Energy corporate headquarters and said, you know, we've got an order here to shut you down early for inspections. And the nuclear officer at First Energy Nuclear, according to the Office of the Inspector General, said, don't shut us down. It'll hurt our profits. It'll look bad on Wall Street. We don't have fuel here to make our refueling operation. The order was pocketed. It was never issued. And it was never issued according to the Office of Inspector General because, according to their investigation, it appears that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission needs absolute proof before it will shut down a nuclear power plant early. We've also seen the whole issue of regulatory capture in what we've termed a revolving door between industry and regulator. Again, this is part of the concern. We hearken back to the warning of the National Diet in Japan. Collusion of government, regulator, and industry was the cause of the accident at Fukushima. Here we see former NRC Chairman Dale Klein. In this picture, Dale Klein is now chairing the TEPCO Reform Committee in Japan. So he goes from U.S. nuclear regulator to TEPCO promoter. And he wants to restore. But, you know, we had concerns about the NRC under decline through as early as January of 2007, when Chairman Klein, in addressing concerns about the vulnerability of every U.S. nuclear power plant to aircraft crash or attack, even more specifically. Concerns were assuaged by Chairman Klein by saying nuclear power plants are inherently robust structures that our studies show provide adequate protection in a hypothetical attack by an airplane. No problem. Don't worry. Sit down. Be quiet. Go to work. Mind your business. We got you covered. What he did not tell you was one of those studies was done by Argonne National Lab, specifically on U.S. nuclear power plants, in their evaluation of aircraft hazard analysis for nuclear power plants, September 9, 1982. This is while CGN is being constructed. It appears that for all U.S. plants currently under construction, it has been found that it is not necessary to require containments designed to take the impact of a large commercial jet aircraft. A complete contradiction from what Chairman Klein told the American public in the days, weeks, years following the ever apparent threat of our enemies, those who would do us harm, knowing that nuclear power plants are vulnerable. If you read the 9/11 Commission, if you've read the 9/11 Commission report, Al-Qaeda's original plan was to hijack 10 aircraft and direct 2 of them into U.S. nuclear facilities. One of those was a flight training exercise that Mohammed Atta took over Indian Point, just 25 miles from New York City, where they viewed the vulnerability of using nuclear power plants to enhance their attack. And yet the American people have been lied to, not to protect us, but to protect the production agenda and the financial agenda of the nuclear industry. Well, this brings us to our story tonight of collusion of government, regulator, and industry to protect not the American people, not the environment, but the financial and production agenda of this industry. What you're looking at here on the slide to the left is the Oyster Creek nuclear power plant in Toms River, New Jersey. It is the original Fukushima Daiichi. It was the first General Electric Mark I boiling water reactor, a 600 megawatt reactor commissioned in October of 1969, 60 miles from New York. This was the first Mark I. The Mark I that was eventually to be used as a pattern for Fukushima Daiichi. And following the accident, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, in an effort to whitewash the consequence of operating dangerous, dated, aging, flawed nuclear power plants, put together a set of recommendations, as you will note, for enhancing reactor safety in the 21st century. Clearly, the agenda here is to continue operation. And in fact, what we've known is that in 1972, just a few years after Oyster Creek was commissioned, the chief safety officer within the Atomic Energy Commission, the predecessor of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, in a memorandum to his colleagues on September 25th, 1972, warned that the Mark I boiling water reactor should be discontinued. They should not be operated. They should no longer license the Mark I reactor, primarily because the containment structure, the all-important last barrier for public health and safety and the environment, was too small. And what you see here is sort of a couple of schematics of what the GE boiling water reactor technology relies upon. Is a containment design, large diameter donut, 18 feet in diameter, 1 million gallons of water, and then a bulbous steel structure in which the reactor vessel fits. And this is the containment structure that's credited as the barrier to catastrophe. And in principle, if there is a severe accident, if there is an overheating of the reactor fuel, overpressure, lots of steam, they got to deal with it, too much heat, they dump it into this dry well, as it's called, and then through 10 large diameter pipes, the heat and the steam and the pressure is driven under this 1 million gallons of water through these downcomers, as they're called, and the steam and the pressure and the heat are supposed to be quenched in that donut. And I'll just point out that the 3 engineers who were some of the principals that designed this, Dale Hubbard, Richard Miner, and Dale Bridenbaugh, publicly resigned their GE managerial positions before Congress in 1976, saying this won't work. And they were ignored. And but their warning followed the warning of Stephen Anauer, who was the AEC safety officer. And what they all pointed out is that these GE BWRs, this all-important containment system for this particular design, is 1/6 the volume of the containment that you typically see in these large pressurized water reactors like Seabrook or like 3 Mile Island. But we know, we have known for decades that if this system is challenged under severe accident, it will fail. And when I was in front of CNN, that camera, on March 11th, this was just history. I was just recounting history. Not my concern. We've been warned. We've been warned many times by different people, by the AEC. I'll add that in 1986, the chief safety officer with the NRC, Harold Denton, told us there's a 90% chance of failure of this containment design if challenged by a severe accident. How many warnings do we get Japan has run out. In fact, one of the recommendations, well, I should add that following Harold Denton's warning, the NRC took the threat somewhat seriously. And the NRC in 1989 went to the operators of these 24 Mark I boiling water reactors in the United States and requested that they install a vent on containment. They requested that the operators install a vent line. 8-inch, this is, what you see here is a schematic of a vent system that is routinely used in every boiling water reactor like Columbia.
Not every.
Well, no, let me finish. This schematic down here is what is in every boiling water reactor, and it is used to purge containment, to get in here for refueling, to get in here for routine maintenance and surveillance. So, and it goes through what they call the standby gas treatment, which is a charcoal bed radiation filtration system. So when they purge containment for routine operations, it gets filtered and then it goes out a 300-foot stack. The problem is that the containment is unreliable, which we've established, and the service vent is not capable of managing high pressure, high steam, hydrogen gas, radiation. And so in 1989, the NRC sent out a request that in order to provide a management strategy for a nuclear accident in one of these reactors, that you bypass this ductwork and you put a hardened vent line, an 8-inch steel line that bypasses the bottleneck and then comes directly out to the stack. So there's a control room operated valve that gives the operators the opportunity to defeat containment temporarily, to relieve the pressure and vent the hydrogen gas. It goes to a 30 psi rupture disk. That's tire pressure. That rupture disk and the valve then provide a direct line from the containment to the environment. I mean, this makes about as much sense as screen doors on a submarine. You know, they have completely defeated the idea. They should have removed the word containment because it no longer serves as a containment. This we saw at Fukushima Daiichi. This was installed in 1992 at all 6 units by TEPCO to service the plant in the event of a severe accident. And with the total power failure, this vent would not open. The radiation was too high for workers to get in there to manually open. And hydrogen gas, at this point, hydrogen gas has lifted the top of this component off its screws. And hydrogen gas is now getting into the reactor building, where in many cases, in all cases, it found ignition points. And we saw the detonations that we've been warned about since 1972 and have been completely ignored. So we have an unreliable fix for unreliable containments. And this is the result of a production agenda that is so focused on its own self-interest that we have the tremendous amount of land contamination in Japan. I was just there in December of last year, and I can tell you that the cleanup operations, the Japanese have a word for it, for cleanup. They call it transcontamination. This is the Japanese, this is the interpretation of what the Japanese understand. Now, there is no cleanup. You just contaminate somebody else. And even in those operations, the contractors are it's a complete fraud. They're pushing contaminated soil into rivers. They're scraping up large areas of land, putting it in big piles, and covering it over with plastic, and that's it. That's the future. They're looking, the Japanese government is trying to persuade the people to share the burden, is how it's called. Take some of the contamination so they don't have it all. It's not going well for that plan. So we have this one recommendation that's a big concern right now, is that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the nuclear industry are hell-bent to continue the operation of these antiquated, flawed, aging GEBWRs. These are cash cows. But there's a conflict right now between the regulator and the industry. The recommendation of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is, well, first of all, I should say that we have an order that's been issued. The order was issued on March 12, 2012 to all operators of Mark I and Mark II reactors. So it applies to Columbia. The order is that the operators at Columbia are to begin a set of changes and retrofits and upgrades to have a reliable vent. So the vents that were requested to be voluntarily installed on all Mark I's has now been extended to the Mark II's. So Columbia is now being asked, only by order, to put a vent in. This is a bit of an upgrade over the Mark I. But again, it's too small. The containment is not serviceable. The order that's in place is to put in these upgrades that would provide management strategies for Columbia to prevent fuel damage. Okay? So, longer fire hoses. More mobile diesel generators. More access to different kinds of cooling water. Pumper trucks. Bring more water in. Prevent the core damage. This is the order. The order, as it's written, expressly states this does not apply to any service post-fuel damage. So the order that's in place right now, which Columbia is to comply with by December 31st, 2016, it's 2 more fuel cycles, does not service the reactor for a meltdown. To me, that is Fukushima lessons unlearned. And again, it is a priority, a bias that promotes a production agenda over public safety. Now, the staff of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I mean, we were just all over this. You're ordering compliance for changes that don't address core damage? And they say, wait a minute, wait, don't, you know, look, I'm a nice guy. We're going to look at the post-fuel damage event, but not in this order. We're going to take that up in another set of regulation, and another set of recommendations. And so in November 2012, the staff introduced a draft order. And the draft order is to, basically what it presents is 4 options. Option 1 is to do nothing more than follow the March 2012 order for servicing containment vents pre-fuel damage, excluding post-fuel damage, option 1. So basically that means do no more. Option 2 is to install what they call a severe accident capable vent on all Mark I, Mark II, which means that it would upgrade the venting system on the current Mark I to include evaluations and changes and modifications that would take into consideration the consequences of fuel damage, namely high temperature, high pressure, and hydrogen gas. But option 2 provides no service for radiation. So as one NRC operator has called it, those 300-foot stacks would become fire hoses of radioactivity, where they would vent the heat, the temperature, the hydrogen gas, but in the process they would also be venting radioactive particulate, fuel damage. Option 3 would be a severe accident capable vent with a high capacity filter in this vent line, so that you would essentially capture the all of the particulate, but you would capture none of the noble gas. You can't filter that stuff out. So that means radioactive krypton, radioactive xenon would escape as a gas, and then as a decay product, within a matter of seconds and minutes, it would rain out radioactive particulate of strontium-90 and cesium-137. So it's the decay chain in those Nobel gas is particulate. But it would filter out a good bit of it if they have this filter in. this is what has been installed in a Swiss boiling water reactor since Chernobyl. Basically all the European reactors have put in these filtration systems for filtering containment, so that the operators have the option, in good conscience, they can say that they have preserved at least the principle of containment integrity, which is to keep the radiation in by putting a filter. They're venting it, they're defeating containment, but because they have a filtration system, at least they have some mindful attention to trying to keep the radiation and to keep the concept of containment. So these are routinely installed, but it basically provides, it gives the operator confidence that they can vent containment and not contaminate wholesale communities, massive land contamination, but not overpressurize the containment. What we now see in terms of this whole concept of nuclear regulatory capture is that you are now part, with this awareness, you are now witness that the staff of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has made recommendations to backfit Mark I, Mark II reactors with filters on high capacity, on these hardened vent systems, and the industry is coming out wholesale against it. And they are joined by their champions on Capitol Hill. So the House Energy and Commerce Committee, 20 of the Republican members came out and said, no filters, not cost beneficial. Public safety is only benefited in the most marginal, insignificant way by putting a filter on this new vent. The Nuclear Energy Institute, chiefly the lobby group on Capitol Hill for the nuclear industry, has come out against the filters. And the cost is going to be somewhere, it's difficult because they don't even have this out to vendors yet, anywhere from 16 to 24 million for the Mark I. For the Mark II, there's a problem, even for the filtered vent system, because the NRC has identified that the Mark II, like Columbia, is more vulnerable than the others to what they call containment bypass, where in the event of a core damage event, that, you know, when you would want to use the filter most of in venting operation, in fact, there's a fly in the ointment for Columbia and the other 7, because if the core goes ex vessel, if it goes through the bottom of the vessel, there are penetrations that the Mark II is going to be vulnerable to bypass containment. So a filtered vent coming off the containment is very likely to be bypassed. So it'll still get into the reactor building and eventually work its way out into the environment. So the Mark II is still on the drawing board. So they don't really have a fix yet in mind, although they think that it's plausible. But it's not as clear-cut as with that Mark I filtered venting system. So we're keeping our eye on the Mark II in that it has not been vetted to have a venting system that has any reliability. And so, but the industry, and it has still come out against that. And I just wanted to end our comments here by the fact that you in this community are in a very unique situation because you have one of these very dangerous reactors co-located on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. You have millions of gallons of nuclear waste in these 177 tanks around the farm that are tentatively in stable condition. And it's a tenuous situation where you now have a vulnerable reactor co-located with this nuclear reserve. You know, these tanks were originally to service, built in 1940s to service 20 years. And they're leaking. Some of the tanks are leaking in the vicinity of the reactor. There are large contamination plumes moving under the Columbia Nuclear Generating Station. And so there is this threat that was never really evaluated in the license renewal for the Columbia Nuclear Generating Station. So they never really looked at the problem of how these two threats conjoined to perhaps to be a much larger threat. And I just close on this note that we've seen this before many years ago in Kashtim in 1957, where the Mayak site was the plutonium production center for the Russian nuclear weapons industry, and it was principally the sister project of Hanford. And this is what we have now, is a compounding of this nuclear threat. Which brings me to the end of our talk, that we are faced with a growing, dirty, dangerous, and expensive threat, but we have a growing alliance of activists, now governments, with Germany phasing out nuclear power, Japan mobilizing to keep its nuclear power shut down. And so we're not alone in this active effort for a 21st century energy policy in renewables, efficiency, and conservation. So thank you.
So if people have questions, and I see a hand shooting up right there, Tom.
Yeah. Could you talk about the spent nuclear fuel pool?